Welcome to this episode of the Cold Start Corner. I'm Eric Matei, joined by a very special guest today in Mr. Ali Oromchian. Ali, thank you for joining us today on the Cold Start Corner.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks for the invite. I'm excited to be here. Yeah.
So as many of our viewers may be aware, Ali is the principal founder of DM Counsel, which is a specialty law firm that works nationwide, working with medical practices across specialties and across all stages of the practice lifecycle. So Ali is joining us today on the Cold Start Corner specifically to give us some insights and a deep dive into the legal considerations for the cold start doctor. So Ali, man, thank you again for joining us today. I know we've got a lot to get to, so let's go ahead and jump right into it.
Let's do it. This is a lot of fun. I appreciate you inviting me, and we're both passionate about startups, and it's fun to be able to talk about it. So
absolutely. So look, you are the expert here as it pertains to the legal side of cold start optometry practices. So let's maybe take it from the beginning, and let's put ourselves in the shoes of our audience, those doctors that are looking to launch their cold start in the coming year, perhaps in the very early stages. I mean, what are like the first initial legal considerations and needs that someone needs to account for in their cold start?
Yeah, no, that's a great place to start. And what's funny, Eric, is that I think when people start to think about cold starts, they're usually it's usually a backup plan to what they initially want to do, which is to buy an office, right? They usually want to buy an office, but they realize that over time that they can't find an office that they like, or it's not in a situation where they love to like walk into, or there may be bodies buried in places that they don't know, and so they're worried about going there, and then so they fall back on this idea of I'm going to do a startup. But what's really cool, and I think you see this in your consulting, and we certainly see it, is that the return on investment on a startup is sometimes so high, and it's so satisfactionally heavy for these young doctors. It's awesome to be involved in it. And I'll tell you, I think thinking about location is really important, as and then starting to think about, all right, how do I get started, right? Like, how do I find a location? I've picked my city or my county that I want to be in, and how do I go and take that first step? And usually, what we recommend is to work with a commercial broker that specializes in healthcare. Like every industry, there's like good commercial brokers, and then there's not so good commercial brokers, right? But like, I think finding someone who's like super involved in optometry and healthcare in general, and letting them kind of negotiate a letter of intent and start that process is really kind of step one, really, in this process.
Sure. So now mind you, that's also going to go hand in hand with incorporating the business, right?
Yeah.
So speak a little bit to that, and I know and message to our audience. We're very fortunate that Ali can join us, and that his firm has a national presence, right? All 50 states you guys operate in. So why don't we talk a little bit about just how to incorporate the business? And mind you, again, audience, this is definitely something that will vary by state. But Ali, if you could just shed some insights on what that process would look like to incorporate your business.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course. Yeah. So there's a lot of advantages to being incorporated. And when we talk about incorporation, for those of you that don't know what that means, is you set up a separate legal entity. So in most states, that's a corporation. In some states, if you're fortunate enough, it's a LLC, which is a limited liability company. And in some states, you have to have something called a PLLC, which is just a professional limited liability company that all doctors have to be part of. But there's a lot of benefits to being incorporated. You get a huge amount of tax write-offs and deductions that you don't get by not being incorporated. You get limited liability, which means that if, God forbid, you get sued by a non-patient, because malpractice is not covered, you have to have malpractice insurance for that. But for any other kind of lawsuit, employee lawsuits, slip and falls, whatever, your corporation protects you that way. And one little like tidbit that a lot of people don't know, Eric, is that when you incorporate, right, and you get your loan under your corporation and you get your lease under your corporation, None of that appears on your personal credit, right? None of that appears, which is so cool when you're trying to build credit and build wealth in optometry, because the reality is that, you know, your credit is clean. Everything is under your corporation. Your loan is under your corporation. Your lease is under your corporation. So there's a ton of benefits. And you know, it's funny, you know, 10 years ago, I used to hear CPAs, you know, even in optometry say, don't incorporate and forget it, and, you know, don't do that. And it's, you know, because they just didn't want to do the tax returns, you know, even though it's, you know, extra revenue for them, they just didn't want to go through that process. And a lot of them have finally changed their tune because they see what a big drawback it is. So to not be incorporated.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I suppose the first big message to the audience here is get yourself incorporated. Absolutely. Yeah. But then also along with that, be wary of state guidelines, right?
Yes.
Because this will vary by state. So, okay. So you want to start by incorporating your business so as to protect yourself and your practice. And I really like what you said also, that in securing your financing and running the business through that designated entity, also your personal credit, your personal wealth are not exposed in the way they would be if otherwise.
Right.
Now, that being said, this brings us to, I suppose, the next key consideration from a cold start perspective with as it pertains to the legal side of things. As we're talking about the fact that your established legal entity is going to protect you, your personal wealth, your personal credit. When we talk about lawsuits in healthcare, it's a real thing. It's a real thing. So share a bit about malpractice, slip and fall, and then also just human resources and kind of what happens on that front. Like, where are doctors most exposed to be exposed to a lawsuit in a practice in modern eye care?
Yeah, no, totally. Absolutely. Yeah. So, you know, as you kind of get ready to open up your office, right? The number one thing that we see trip up young optometrists is HR violation, right? Employment law violations. And these are, Eric, things that no one ever talks about in school, right? I mean, they get so little business education anyways, right? But the HR side is even more ignored because it's so complex, it's so different, you know, state to state, and nobody wants to be on the wrong side of that by giving bad information. So you know, and we'll talk about the lease in a second in terms of, you know, startups, but really I think the messaging has to be, make sure you have your HR house in order. And what that means is to use, you know, companies that are optometry specific, like HR for Health, right? Not using your payroll company for their HR manual and things of that nature. They use those same manuals for you that they use for like a coffee shop, right? Sure. And so like, you're a professional, like there's a lot of stuff that you need that those manuals don't have. And so I would say don't do that. You know, don't have your CPA running your payroll. You know, we're seeing issues there as well frequently. I think the key is, you know, get an HR company, get HR compliant, and then figure out, like, you know, use their payroll or use some other payroll, but like just do it right from day one. And yes, it's a little bit of a cost, but it's well worth it, because, you know, if you get sued, it's bad, especially in the initial years. So
absolutely. Yeah, it's so important to point that out. And I recall you shared with me previous conversation. We were talking a couple of weeks ago, and you shared that these days it's more likely that you're sued by a former employee than you're sued by a disgruntled patient.
100% of the time. Yeah, 100%. Wow. It's incredible. The number of malpractice cases are outnumbered by HR cases, you know, every single year. And it's only increasing, right? It's only increasing because technology and clinical skills are getting better and better and better. And so, you know, students are coming out fully prepared to be an optometrist, you know, and they're getting trained and mentored and all those kind of things. So they're ready to rock and roll. But then it's like, no one's teaching me about HR, right? No one's teaching me about business. And so that's the gap that we want to fill and make sure you do it right. So awesome. Okay, so we touched on establishing your business as a separate legal entity. Why? To protect yourself, your personal wealth, your credit. We talked about the importance of HR compliance and legally protecting yourself from
what is the source of the where you're exposed to the most risk of a lawsuit, right? And then this third key piece, lease negotiation. Wow,
Yes.
what a fascinating topic. I feel like we could probably have a whole other episode just devoted to that. So share a little bit about, again, Ali, from the cold starts perspective, share a little bit about what they need to know as they're entering this world of lease negotiation.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what's interesting, Eric, your lease or, that you sign as a doctor is usually the biggest or the second biggest cost that you have in your entire practice, right? In your entire practice. And so it's incredible how many people take it for granted, right? As far as the negotiation. So it's a really important document to review with a lawyer. Make sure you negotiate. If you've done the right thing in the initial stages and you have a commercial broker who has helped you with the letter of intent, you're a step ahead, right? You're a step ahead. But then the second step is making sure you have someone that has experience in optometry be able to negotiate the terms. And the things that we see sometimes that hang up our doctors are things like, something called a recapture provision, right? And that's language that says, if you as the doctor bring on an associate, bring on a partner, sell to someone else, whether it's because of, God forbid, disability, injury, or you just decide to move out of the area, you have to give the space that you just built out back to the landlord, right? I mean, it's crazy, right? It's crazy. And now it sounds rare because it's so crazy, but it's in almost every lease. It's in almost every lease. And it's so easy to miss those kinds of things. And so, it's important not to try to do that by yourself because it's not one of those things that you can figure out easily. There may be things that you can figure out and you say, oh, this doesn't sound right. But there's a lot more things that sometimes are missing from these leases that protect the doctors. And so I would say, it's a one-time cost, just, have someone review it for you, go through it with you, help you negotiate it. That way you avoid these potential problems, down the road. And I mean, the recapture provision is just one thing, Eric, right? Like you and I know, there's issues with like CAMs, common area maintenance costs. I mean, there's just so much, right? There's
Absolutely.
So much.
Triple net terms and
triple net terms. Yeah.
And then when you start looking at some of that stuff, because our perspective on this working with cold starts is we're all about the financials, right? We're all about the budget. We're all about the financial model, ensuring that we're getting proper financing, all these things. But absolutely, and all of these things that you're referencing, triple net turns, CAMs, all these different fees and things that may be embedded in a lease, definitely is going to have to be noted when creating the financials. Okay, so Ali, man, this has been great. So to our viewers out there, to kind of pull this all together, the three big critical pieces of legal consideration here as you're cold starting is going to be incorporating your practice separately from yourself, right? Secondly, having all that HR house in order, realizing that HR violations are going to be the number one source where you're most exposed of lawsuit. And then the third piece is that lease negotiation and protecting yourself in the future of your practice. So fascinating stuff. And mind you, on that note, obviously, we could probably go into full hours-long episodes on each of these sections. So that being said, as we're kind of pulling all this together, Ali, how can our viewers who want to learn more, how can they connect with you? And I suppose also share a little bit about the work, the scope of work that you guys do on DM Counsel and how you can help a cold start doctor through each of these steps.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I think, Eric, that we're really proud of and we feel super blessed about is the fact that we have a national reputation for helping optometric entrepreneurs, as I call them, right? And the idea there is, you're a student and then you're a graduate and you're an optometrist. What we want to do is we want to make sure you're able to build wealth. We want to make sure you're able to get to financial independence. And the way to do that as an optometrist is to own your own business and to become an entrepreneur. And so we are firm believers of that, and we scream it at the top of the mountains, at every opportunity we get. And I mean, I speak a lot and I teach a lot because it truly is what's important in optometry. And so would love to chat with anybody that has similar visions, that want to have 1, 2, or more offices. And having multiple offices isn't necessarily for everyone, right? Sometimes, you have one gigantic, awesome office that you service the kind of clients, and patients that you want, and that's perfect. And sometimes it's like the doctor we spoke about last week, they may want 4 or 5 offices, but it all starts with a strong foundation. And from a legal perspective, that's what we're here for. And if anyone wants to reach out, there's a couple of easy ways. You can, of course, call our office and schedule a time to chat with me, and we kind of go through your goals and your dreams and your plans, and then we start to talk about sort of next steps, and how do you get involved with Eric, and how do you get involved with a bank, and how do you get involved with other folks that may you may need to have your hand held through the process, so that you can get to where you need to go. You can also reach me via email, which is always a great place. And I don't know if we have show notes or not, but we can put all that stuff up.
Absolutely,
later.
Yeah. We'll be sure all that's available. So, well, Ali Oromchian, man, I tell you, you're a wealth of knowledge. It's always fun to connect with you as well. I always learn something, and it's always just a pleasant conversation. Thank you again so much for joining us here on the Cold Start Corner. We'll have to do this again. Definitely, to our viewers out there, follow along. Look, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Visit the Cold Start Corner at Akrinos.com, and follow us on the socials. And look, don't hesitate to send us any messages if you got maybe some other legal considerations. We can have Ali back on the show to talk more about the legal side of cold starting, purchasing a practice. Also, if you have other ideas for other topics to feature on the Cold Start Corner, we'd love to hear from you. So, Ali,
thank you, Eric. This has been terrific. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's been fun, and look forward to hanging out when we see each other in Vegas in a couple of weeks.
Absolutely. Yeah. Ali, thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.